Binablock ko pala yung camera. Sorry.
Yung ilaw.
Patayin ka ba ikaw?
Okay lang.
Hello. Good evening po. Madam.
Good evening.
So, first things first, who doesn't understand Tagalog? Who speaks English? Wala. Ayan.
Yes.
Yan. Ayos. Alright. So, I'm Tristan. Pakilala ko ng sarili ko. Who am I? Tristan, and I'm nagtatrabaho sa Malaysia. In my valley. So I founded Malaysia, KL Kuala Lumpur Mongo Users Group sa Malaysia. And also Webcam KL. So nagulat ako meron na palang webkit dito. Similar format siya sa Webcam KL sa Malaysia. And wala dito si Jem ngayon, which is so si Jem is, we're starting the Manila Mongo Users Group here in the Philippines. So what do? I work at My Valley. Kung may wifi sana, pwede kayo pumunta sa website, www.myvalley.com. I work there as a sysad, web designer, backend developer, front-end developer. So apat kami na may ganitong designation, and then the rest purely front-end lang or purely design. The others is purely backend, purely system administration. So apat yung pinaka-full stack. I'm one of those that lahat ginagalaw. Primarily, pag nagawa ng backend and frontend is Ruby on Rails and jQuery, JavaScript. Some of the gems na na-publish is Embeddify. If you've ever worked sa Facebook Open Graph, gusto nyo kunin yung Open Graph details ng isang page, or kung wala siyang Open Graph details, gusto nyo kunin in an Open Graph format yung details ng description, yung title, sample picture, ganyan, you can use this gem. And also, if you're using the cheap API, gusto kayo gumawa ng bumili ng domain, mag-administer ng domain, DNS records, very in nature there. So, today's topic is about MongoDB, and MongoDB is a NoSQL database. So, NoSQL in general, it's a different way of thinking versus relational databases. So, noong 1960s, merong pinormalize nila yung definition ng relational database. So, it's a relational database, may columns, may rows, primary keys, normalization, how data is connected to each other. So, may formalization yan 50 years ago, 1960s. Recently, nagkaroon ng parang renaissance ng thinking about databases, how you store data. So, nagkaroon ng NoSQL or something that's not relational. Meron siyang different types, key value, which is Redis, Memcache, mga ganyan, klase. Document type, MongoDB is a document store. Big table, and also the graph data source, like for example, Neo4j. So so within NoSQL, there are also different types of data stores. Hindi lang siya basta NoSQL. Hindi siya period in a SQL language, NoSQL siya. So, and NoSQL, the main differentiation niya sa relational is hindi siya relational, and it forgoes some of the ACID compliance, yung atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability na sinasabi ng relational databases. So for example, atomicity. Most NoSQL databases don't support transactions. So, wala kang begin transaction tapos gagawin mo lahat. And then, pag nagkaroon ng error sa isang update, roll back lahat siya sa other transactions. So, at the database level, wala siyang support for transactions. Pero, that doesn't mean na you can't do transactions. Yun nga lang, kailangan mo siyang gawin sa client code. So, magkakaroon ka ng parang nag-multi-threaded programming ka. Meron kang semaphores and locks and spin locks and those things. So, sa client code mo siya gagawin, the database itself, you can't depend on it na mag-perform atomicity sa'yo. So for example, consistency, we have something called eventual consistency as well. So for example, meron kang, if in a normal SQL database, master-slave, or a master-master application, pag nag-write ka sa isang master, tapos nag-read ka dun sa slave, you are assured na makukuha mo yung update dun sa master. In NoSQL, there's something called eventual consistency, wherein pag write mo sa master, you're not sure na na-propagate siya sa lahat ng mga replicants niya. So these compromises, may reason bakit nagkaroon ng compromise sa kanya, and we'll go there later. So why NoSQL? So ito yung later. Bakit nagpo-forgo ng ibang ACID compliance? Kasi nga, you should use the best tool for your job. For the past 50 years, relational databases have been yung pinaka parang hammer. Everything, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and it's all that we have. And napaka-flexible niya, you can do anything with that. But if you tweak some of the constraints, like yung atomicity, consistency, yung everything about ACID, you can forgo a bit of its demands, and you end up with something that's faster, or something that's more scalable, or something that's that can be replicated easily. Mga ganon. So, in NoSQL, ang pinaka philosophy nila is to use the best tool for the job. And you might hear na NoSQL is fast. And I put it in quotes kasi it really depends what you mean by fast. If you forgo consistency, for example, na nag-write ka sa master, not necessarily sa slave, you can have as fast writes as you can, pero hindi ka assured na makikita mo siya on every read. So, and for most of use cases, like for example logs, or for example comments, it's not required na makita kagad ng client na nag-update siya. For example, someone comments na, for example sa Facebook, nag-comment ka na okay talk na to. Ano? Medyo interesting ba o okay lang? Yeah, so for example, sa Facebook nag-comment kayo, not everyone na nakakonect sa Facebook kailangan makita kagad yung comment mo. So there is a lag time para ma-propagate yung write. So, and that lag time makes the writing, yung pag-write mo sa database, mas mabilis kasi hindi na kailangan mag-ping back na sabihin, oh okay, tapos na yung write sa lahat ng mga replicas ko across the world. So, mga ganyan. And madalas pag tinatanong, ano ang usual difference? This is more about document stores. Ano yung difference? Bakit ko gagamitin yung isang document store or a NoSQL database versus a relational database? And you usually give them yung buffet versus a menu analogy. So, who here alam ko ano yung buffet?
Meron ba kayo nun?
Meron pa nun?
Kasi sa Malaysia, madalas buffet. Nagulat niya ako, punta ako doon. So, hindi ka basta pupunta sa order. Kailangan pumunta ka, umikot ka, buffet, and then upo ka, and then may dadating sa'yo ng waiter, tapos titingnan ko na yung order mo, tapos bibigyan ka ng bill. Tapos yung mabayaran mo. So, ganun siya. So, sa Malaysia, buffet siya. So, ang sa buffet, so yan, yun nga. Pupunta ka, may hari ng mga pagkain dyan. Imagine na natin, mga hindi pa nag-dinner dyan, sorry. Imagine na natin may table, yan, tapos may chicken, may pork, may soup, may dessert, may salad, tapos may cake, may ganyan, may kanin. Pupunta ka, pupunin mo isa-isa, so meron kang plate, nalagay mo yung pagkain mo dyan, tapos upo ka na, tapos kainin mo siya. Versus, for example, sa isang restaurant, meron kang menu, order mo, so pork apitada na pork apitada, tapos may menu dyan, tapos dadating sa'yo, fully assembled na. So parang ganyan yung NoSQL saka SQL. So sa relational database, meron kang maraming mga tables, and then gagawa ka ng join. So pupunin mo certain characteristics from this table, certain characteristics from this table, and then you do a join sa plate, and then you end up with a result na yung exactly yung gusto mo. And sa NoSQL, it's like picking from a menu. So you have an identifier, kukunin mo siya, and then once you, at least on a document store, when you get one, you get everything else that comes with that identifier. So kung pork apitada siya, everything that comes with pork apitada, yung pork, yung gulay, yung soup, kung meal siya, may kasamang tubig, ganyan. So there are advantages and disadvantages dyan. We'll go about it later, but think about kung ano yung advantages and disadvantages ng buffet versus menu. Para mamaya. So what is MongoDB? And tulad na sabi mo nila, it's a document store. And you can store anything related to the document. So for example, gumawa ka ng recipe ng pork afritada. Everything about the pork afritada is there. So kung ano yung ingredients niya, paano siya niluto, ganyan. It's one whole document. You don't have to go shopping sa iba't ibang tables para gawin yung recipe na yun. And it's using a binary JSON format as the storage type. So, and ang query language niya is JSON-like. So later, I'm not sure kung pupunta pa tayo sa query language niya kasi I also don't use yung query language niya madalas. It's more, I usually use an abstraction layer na pag-usapan natin mamaya. Pero if you want to know more, you can go to this link. I'll upload yung slide deck mamaya sa Facebook. Alright. Oh, by the way, kung meron kayong questions, you don't have to wait hanggang sa huli para itanong. Kung may questions na kayo, at para hindi malimutan, pwede nyo nang tanong sa akin. Matagal pa yung, maaga tayo nagsimula, so matagal pa yung talk natin. Tanong lang. May questions na ba so far? You don't have to wait for me to ask if there are questions. Yes, thank you.
I don't know if this will be discussed later, but probably yung question ko will focus on, as we know, the market is emerging to, or I mean, the business is getting more agile and they want as much as possible to make the most out of their data. Right now, ang karaniwang ginagamit is relational databases because it can support data warehousing and business intelligence. Now, my question is, how does MongoDB addresses this need? Because as far as I know, with the abstraction and distributed caching, they still have difficulties on how to address data warehousing.
So the question is, how does MongoDB address data warehousing? This is more and more advanced topic. It's more about sharding and replication in those days. But MongoDB is a very young technology. So medyo about 3 years, I think. I nakalimutan ko. Pero it's very young versus relational databases, which already 50 plus years. 1960s pa, and even before, theoretically, alam na nila yung performance characteristics ng isang relational database and what makes a good relational database. So, in the past couple of years, Tengen, yung gumawa ng MongoDB, they're already making lots of inroads on that one, data warehousing. And I'm not sure what you mean by data warehousing. It's more about scalability. Or is it more about storage of data, making sure that it doesn't get
Storage
deleted?
plus analytics.
How do you do multi-dimensional queries on non-relational database?
Merong iba't ibang paraan para sa multi-dimensional queries, and usually, and I will go on to that further later, usually you don't do multi-dimensional queries. And that's actually a good point. I think brought about yan pa sa buffet and menu analogy. Very good. So usually, I'll answer it now na rin. So, you don't do multi-dimensional queries dahil, for example, meron kang menu. Okay? And then, so for example, order ka 5 pork afritada. So, dumating sa'yo 5 pork afritada. And then, hindi ka pala, allergic ka pala sa pork. So, kailangan mong tanggalin lahat ng pork. So, it's a lot harder to remove yun, kung ano yung gusto mo, or just take what you want dun sa menu na yun, dun sa mga menus, versus pumunta ka dun sa buffet, kunin mo except yung pork. So it's the difference between joining different tables versus getting a complete document. Do you get the analogy? Alright? Did I answer your question?
I've been reading up on MongoDB for some time. Doon sa website nila, meron mga use cases, applications on when to use. Well, kung saan bagay ang
When is
MongoDB.
it best to use MongoDB? By the way, do you have white papers on yung mga ganun?
Nandun lahat sa website
Yeah,
naman.
also
oo.
website.
Yung,
It's-
nasa Facebook group ka ba?
Ay,
Ipopost ko na lang. Hanapin nyo yung Facebook.
So ang website nila is mongodb.org. Ang gumawa is tengen.com, 10gen.com. segueing from your question, ito yung mga use cases madalas for MongoDB. So for example, operational intelligence like log data, because of yung relaxation nga ng asset compliance, write ka lang ng write, and you don't really care about reading it until sometime later. Where sometime later, malamang consistent na siya, and anytime you read from it, okay na. And pre-aggregated reports, and you might notice important yung pre-aggregated. You don't do the aggregation on the fly dun sa database itself. Usually it's pre-aggregated, assembled na siya yung document, and then you store it there in MongoDB. So that when you query it, everything related to this report, okay na. And that's also one of the reasons why MongoDB is considered fast. Kasi, for example, as we'll go later sa coding, for example, you have a blog, may post ka, and then you have comments. Instead of doing a post, you take the post record, and then you do a join with the comments about every comment about this post. When you take the post, pati yung lahat ng comments queried na. So it's just one trip to the database versus two. And it goes further than that. For example, if a comment has sub-comments, so you don't do another join or a self-join or something like that. You can get everything related to a post, like for example, images, for example, everything related to a post in one trip to the database versus doing a join on the database. Yeah.
Comparing with Tristan. So you're doing. You could do that with an ad hoc MapReduce, right?
Yeah.
So basically sige. Divide ko yung question ko. Sa MongoDB kasi meron tinatawag ng views. Basically, i-prepare mo yung query mo, store it, and siya yung gagawa ng
result set.
tago mo niya. Sa Mongo, difference na with Couch is that you can do MapReduce ad hoc na mabilis. Diba? So, is it possible that what you said can be done also in, say, ad hoc, you don't have to prepare, say, ganito kailangan i-structure yung when getting posts, kailangan may pangalakan na may reduction step ka to get the comments and all that, or
Yeah, so if I understand that question correctly, do I have to use MapReduce? Can I use MapReduce and a query language with Mongo?
sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to to get the post in one fetch.
Yeah, in one fetch. So, kasi ang Mongo, there are two types of querying Mongo. There's the MapReduce way, and there's the yung JSON-like query language. Most of the time, we use the JSON-like query language, especially if you have indexes. Kasi pwede mo sabihin, lahat ng post na ang pangalan ay post where
So may index siya.
May indexes na siya. So there's that, and there's also a way to query MongoDB using MapReduce. Although there are caveats with MapReduce in Mongo. Right now, ang MapReduce sa Mongo, at least by 2.4, is running on the database. It's not as performant as when you're running it in a sharded, replicated environment. So, kasi umaandar lang siya, isang process lang siya sa isang database. So, if all of your data is in one server, or one instance of Mongo, then you have just one MapReduce. It doesn't really make sense kasi magmamap ka, sequential din naman yung pagmamap mo, so it doesn't make sense. It's more powerful when you get to the point like billions of data, so you have to shard, and you have like 100 machines running, so map yung map function gets thrown to all of the shards, they all run there, and then babalik sila, and then i-reduce mo siya. Mas mabilis siya by magnitudes. So it also really depends on how your data is structured. Yes.
So, the reduction step ka na, di ba? Can you do pre-reductions? Basically, if you feed mo yung reduction mo to another
Yeah, to another function. I haven't tried that, pero I expect it's possible kasi pwede mo i-write yung reduce result mo into another table and then perform another map there. Or you can do it in memory or you can do it in the application side. But I haven't tried that. Hindi ko alam. I don't rely on.
There's just a problem with that because we're also doing that. Problem is the output collection cannot be sharded, so it has to work with the single. The next MapReduce will have to run on the non-sharded data. So that output has better be really reduced for it to be useful. And you can only run one
Yeah.
per node, so it's not really that.
Yeah,
For big ano lang siya, big jobs.
Yes. So you've used Mongo before?
We're using it in.
So, by the way, survey lang, sinong nakagamit na ng Mongo before in production? Production 2, 3 for me? Nestor?
I use mostly Touch TV.
Touch is, ayaw ko lang kasi MapReduce nila sa...
I'm probably the relax.
Sinong nakapag try na ng Mongo? Try lang. Try.
Ay, scenario, mga pala, no?
Pero yung story naman sa Mongo namin, sa Mind Valley, meron akong parang analytics program na sinusubukan. First time namin gagawin yung Mongo. So parang prototype lang siya para sa akin. And then, eventually, nakita ng mga boss, uy, okay to ah. And then, gawin na natin, i-run natin sa isang project natin. And then, okay, nag-run na siya. And then suddenly, nagkaroon ng mga request din, pwede bang i-add din sa project ko to? And then suddenly, naging production na siya. So, legacy app siya na napakahirap i-maintain kasi isang prototype na pangit-pangit ng pagkakakulitin. Parang cowboy ko din yung it was never expected to be in production. So,
Follow-up question. Sabi mo may index, di ba? So, how does MongoDB work when, for example, ganun ka power failure? Does it reveal the index or?
Indexes created siya during the write. So ang mangyayari, ang performance characteristic niya is when you index a field, ang mangyayari yung write mo magsasuffer ng konti. Kasi when you write it, then you do the index on that document. The index is document on the document. Well, there's a separate table for the indexes, pero the indexes are created during the document creation.
But in that case, na kunwari nag-fail yung write.
Nag-fail yung write?
Kunwari, you're about to write a document and for some reason na kuryente. So, or for example, yung OS hindi nag-save sa file system. How can it ensure na yung index ay may invalidate or
Wala. If the document was not created dun sa...
Nadidetect ba niya na sira yung thing din?
Medyo complicated siya. Actually, we never really experienced that. Although during research, nakita ko na siya. Because what happens is meron siyang write back job. So, ang mangyari, i-write niya kung ano yung gagawin niya and then you write it and then check those things. But the index won't be touched until the document is actually written. Kasi isang operation siya. Hindi siya... I'm not sure kung ano yung low-level activities niya. And we usually don't have any power failures. And besides, the way we use MongoDB is not on critical data such that pag nagkaroon ng maling write, end of the world na. So medyo, it's more... Yung mga ganong klaseng data nasa SQL pa rin. Pero for the data that we use, like for example, analytics, aggregated data, mga ganyan, that's not necessary na pwede ko i-reconstruct or kahit magkaroon ako mga 10 entries na mawawala, okay lang kasi it's a very, very small percentage ng connected data. Yes?
What dimensional lang yung indexing?
There are, ano tawag doon? Yung map, coordinate indexing for ano ba to? Yung for example, latitude, longitude, meron support ang MongoDB about it. I don't know about other dimensional indexing, but I know that meron longitude, latitude indexing and how how near a particular coordinate is to another thing. But aside from that, hindi ko na alam. You'll have to look at the documentation. Alright, so these are the use cases. For example, product, so pinag-usapan natin about data and pre-aggregated reports and bakit hindi ka dapat magkaroon ng too much na aggregation ng data. So usually you save it pre-aggregated. We have product data management, like catalogs and inventory. So for example, ikaw si Amazon, start ka ng books. Meron kang ISBN, meron kang author, meron kang description, meron kang title. So okay, masaya ka na. Nag-sell ka ng maraming books. And then suddenly, nagkaroon ka ng ticket sales, which is very, very different from books. Meron ka siguro, pwede mo siguro sabihin title ng concert, okay. Pero magkakaroon ka ng bagong field, venue, date and time, and then yung class ng ticket, kung first class pa siya or whatever saan ka na sa concert. So, in a relation database, pwede ka siguro mag-single table inheritance, so magkakaroon ka ng extra fields, hindi na normalized yung database mo, and then you say, this is a ticket, this is a book. And then magkakaroon ka ng empty fields, null fields, and then you're just not using yung relational type. And then what happens if you have a ticket, a book, and then you have your electronic devices, you have your tables, chairs, furniture, kung ano na. So, in SQL, magkakaroon ka parang, who has heard of Magento? Yeah. So, have you seen kung paano niya ginagawa yung database? It's a different kind of it's relational pero hindi talaga siya relational. Parang nagkakaroon ka ng fields and then sasabihin yung fields kung saan table siya pupunta. So, medyo complicated na siya. Sorry?
EAV.
Yeah, EAV yun. EAV, entity something value or something. So super complicated siya. That's because yung data structure doesn't really reflect relational. Kasi per product, iba-iba yung attributes. So since MongoDB is a document store, you can have different fields on the same table. And I'll show you a bit later as well kung anong itsura niya. So you can have tickets on the same table, books, chairs, furniture, and those things. So it's really, really good for product inventory. Of course, sa client-side code, kailangan mo pa rin malaman kung anong klaseng data type yung ginagamit. Is it a ticket? Is it a book? And you still have to work on it. But on the storage type, mas efficient siya. Yung peering mo as well, mas efficient. If you're looking for all products that have a venue, then hindi siya magbibigay ng book data. Usually ticket data lang siguro or concert data or something like that. Right? And of course, content management systems. I'm not sure who are Drupal developers here as well. PHP. Yeah. Okay. Good. You can go here. So it's a application for Django. Sorry, not Drupal. Django. Sorry. Django engine. Python pala. Hindi Drupal. All right. I'll be uploading yung slide deck later. So Mongo ID. So since we're in the Ruby and Rails user group meetup, and who are Rails developers aside from just Ruby, and the rest are students. No? Data encoded po.
Call center agent kami.
Napadpad lang sa...
We're here for the food.
Meron ba tayong food? Wala tayong food ba? Parapon? Nako. Yeah, so Mongo ID, usually at least there are many different types of ORMs para sa Rails. So this is more on Rails. You can also use it in Sinatra, but whatever framework that you're using. But usually I use it for Rails. It's another ORM. There's also Mongo Mapper. There are like homebrew Mongo ORMs, but this is my favorite so far. So you can gem install Mongo ID, or if you have a gem file sa Rails project mo, gem Mongo ID. That's it. And kaya favorite ko siya kasi meron siyang active record compatible interface. So you can do, for example, post.where name is Tristan, for example, and it will will give you a criteria, Mongo ID criteria, which you can then, kasi lazily evaluated siya, which you can then look through, and then you can find all of the posts na may pangalan Tristan. And since it has an active record interface, everything about action pack like form 4 or like URL 4 or anything like that behaves exactly just like an active record model. Who has used anything else other than active record? Who has used SQL, DataMapper? Who doesn't know what I'm talking about? No? Ganon!
So, kung active record that, makakapag-migration ka rin.
Titingnan natin mamaya. Ano na yung... Titingnan natin mamaya.
Human, bro.
Ibang migration na. So, active record queries, mostly the same. There are just differences. Also, siyempre yung model definition mo is somewhat different. But about siguro 80 to 90% similar, and you can transfer knowledge from active record to Mongo ID. So we'll do Mongo ID, and let's try something. Ito ba yung 25,000 na? Okay na ba kahit? Okay lang. Meron daw sila matig to 25,000 na. Amortize over 4 years, so 8,000 per year. Mahal pa rin. So every 4 years, pinapalitan nyo.
Palit ng office.
Every 4 years, nagpapalit ng office. Okay lang kahit na medyo okay. Okay. So, okay lang upo ako dito. Nakikita niyo pa ba ako? Medyo maliit ako eh. Okay lang. Alright. Ayan. So, kung sinong nasa IRC, IRC channel. Ayan. So, gawa tayo ng bagong Rails application. Teka, wala akong magpupunta. So, sino nagawa na yung Rails blog tutorial? Doon na silang naggawa ng Rails. Rails blog tutorial, getting started with Rails. Oh, everybody? Okay lang. So, try natin gawin yung Rails blog tutorial, getting started with Rails, using Mongo ID naman. Para malaman nyo kung ano yung differences sa active record. Kasi sa Rails tutorial, ginamit yata nila SQLite. So we'll use Mongo this time. So for those of you, you can follow with your Macs if you want. You can follow with your PCs if you want. Sinong may dalang laptop? Sinong iPad? Sinong compiler yung kasama? Try nyo na lang compile sa laptop. Okay. Ah, hindi po. Ay, nag-off ba? Check na ba?
Bili ng bago. Naka-mirror.
Ayun. Ako, sige, may mirror pa nila. Wala ha? Play. Ayan. Ayan. Nakikita niyo po yung font? Malaki yung font na gusto niyo pa mas malaki ang content. Ayan. So, gawa tayo ng bagong Rails application, Mongo blog for example. Then magpapasa ko ng dalawang options na usually ginagamit ko. -T. Sino alam -T? Capital T.
Skip test.
Skip test unit. Kasi I usually prefer RSpec. So, hindi ko na siya pinapagawa ng test folder. And then -O is skip active record. Kasi hindi tayo gagamit ng active record findings. So, hindi siya gagawa ng database na YAML and those things. Medyo mabagal siya. Sorry?
Hindi, nag-open ng Apple block yun.
Ay, hindi ko alam. Lahap na siya.
Mukhang buya pa ano eh.
Sorry na malaban yung makina mo eh.
Medyo yeah, so normal new Rails application. So, kuha na tayo sa Alright. So, makikita natin dun sa config application. So, automatically commented, nakikita niyo yung highlight?
Yeah.
So, automatic na naka-comment yung active record real time. Usually kapag sa normal raise new project, naka-require siya and also yung test unit. So, first things na ginagawa ko usually is gem Mongo ID and gem respect. And then you bundle the thing. So, meron na tayo Mongo ID. And then, first thing as well, so makikita nyo dito, yung database.yaml, wala siyang migrations, wala siyang ganyan, wala pa. And this is just the way we want it. So, first thing that you also want to do kung mag-install kayo ng, narinig nyo ba ako? Kailangan kong
Okay lang.
Alright, so, first thing na gagawin nyo is to generate yung configuration file ng ID. And then, so, you can see na it's still the same layout, wala naman siya except for yung Momo ID.yaml. Now, for those nasa Mac, kailangan yung syempre mag-install ng isang Mongo server. So, ang favorite ko is Homebrew. Sorry. It's Homebrew. And then this is already installed para sa akin. So, if you want to still install it, you have to reinstall MongoDB. Hindi ko na siya i-unlink kasi matagal pag-compile ng MongoDB saka bagay yung pero this is already running, so you have your MongoDB shell and those things. Right? If you don't want to install yung Mongo server sa local computer mo, maraming mga external MongoDB hosting providers like Mongo HQ, Mongo Lab, you can connect remotely. So for now, we'll do a local host and then database natin is MongoDB development. Right, so the first things na ginagawa dun sa Rails block tutorial is yung scaffold ng post. Sino nakakaalala ng Rails block tutorial? Kasi hindi ko masyadong naalala. So,
Rails generates scaffold.
Yeah. Scaffold, post. Tingnan ko na lang sa internet.
Hindi, field name data types. Data type. Name colon data type. Colon type.
Yeah, so in Mongo ID, if you don't specify the type, it's automatically string. It's string, hindi siya yung 255 character string. It's string na, I think 4,000 characters or something like that. Name, title, body, tingnan ko na lang yung ginawa ko kanina. Name, title, content. Diba? Name, title. Right. So, scaffold, post name. Okay. Okay. So, meron tayo dito at models post. So ito ang model definition sa isang Mongo ID document. So you'll notice hindi siya nag-inherit from active record base. Kasi for an active record, you have active record base dito. Diba? So hindi siya. Instead, ang ginagawa niya is ini-include niya methods from Mongo ID document. Also, definitions niya is field name, field title. So like I said kanina, automatically ang type niya is string if you don't specify yung type niya. Okay? So, we'll run the server. Mas mabilis ba rating natin sa
Hindi ko alam.
pang nag-release?
Ako tinatanong mo.
Okay. fields. Slash posts. Alright, so post, by the way, yung controllers natin, post, so it's the same thing. So post.com, post.find, same active record interface. So you can do new content, hello, shrub, sorry, that's good. Test. And you can create a post, and then you can edit the post, and then show back and those things. So it's the same thing. So, anong nangyari at parang may mali ata ako? Migrations. Hindi ako nag-Rails migrate, DB migrate. Pero umaandar na siya. So that's one of the characteristics ng MongoDB. You don't have to create the collection. Ang tawag nila doon is collection. It's a collection of documents. You don't have to create it. The first time na may query na instructing the database na to write dun sa collection na yon, they automatically creates the collection and the document. And because it's schemaless, walang tables, walang columns, and it's not structured, you don't have to define yung kung ano yung fields. So it's both a pro and a con. For those that are working sa agile development, especially like gusto nyo mag-prototype, gusto nyo mag-explore, and you don't really want to do lots of migrations, and then pag-transfer sa kabilang developer, kailangan i-migrate ulit lahat, you can always just edit your model definition, and then just try it out, and then mabilis lang siya. The con is, when you're doing migrations, you have to do something called a schema migration, where you have to do it on the client. So your client needs to be prepared para maka-encounter ng documents na hindi na-fit dun sa expected mo. So what we usually do is we stub out, we use the null object pattern, we stub out kung ano yung old definition, and then when that definition is called, we write the new field, and then we return that data. So ang nangyayari, it's on a per use basis. Your migration, hindi siya one shot, i-migrate mo lahat. Kasi magpa-block yung server. Although right now, hindi na siya ganun grabe, kasi dati talagang block yung server, hindi ka makaka-write, hindi ka makaka-read. Ngayon nakaka-read ka, pero hindi ka makaka-write, mag-queue yung mga writes. Habang nagma-migrate siya kasi lahat ng mga writes, kasi i-update niya lahat ng documents. So for this case, every time na mag-access ka ng document na hindi nag-fit dun sa current schema ng application mo, saka mo babaguhin yung document. Yun yung recommended practice. So as per use. So that's called a schema migration. So it's different. It's also one of the things na nangyayari where you'll find many posts. You'll find many posts sa internet where ayaw nila ng MongoDB or nahihirapan sila sa MongoDB. It's more because iniisip nila na they're still in the relational database mindset versus yung document store mindset. So there are pros and cons on those things. So, sorry, medyo masakit na yung lalamunan. Okay pa? Okay pa? Ay,
Hindi ng jacket.
jacket. Ayan. Ayos. So, next. Ano ba ito? Next is, ina ko na lang yung, comment. So meron tayong sinatawag sa MongoDB. So kung sa relational, meron tayong has many saka belongs to. Sa MongoDB naman, salamat po. Star treatment. Artista. So meron tayong tinatawag na embedded documents. So ang difference niya is para siyang naka-attach na dun sa original document. Hindi ka magkakaroon ng foreign key sa kabilang document. Although pwede mo siyang gawin, and Mongo ID supports that use case, it's not really encouraged kasi wala siyang join on the database side. So that means, kung may foreign key ka, i-resolve mo yung foreign key sa client side. So for example, may post ka, may post ID, tapos may comment ka, and for some reason, may foreign key ka para sa post ID. So meron kang post ID na field sa comment. That means 2 trips to the database. You get the comment, you return back, oh, my post ID, get the post ID that corresponds to this post. Get the post that corresponds to this post ID. So 2 trips siya. So usually what we do is we embed documents dun sa primary document. You're going to run into circumstances na napaka-denormalized ng data, but that's actually encouraged. It always depends on how your data is structured. So let's try to make something like that. Rails G-level comment. Commenter and body. Commenter. And then we do the controller. And then kukupain ko na lang yung So, kung mapapansin nyo, pareho pa rin siya ng alright. So, meron tayong comments. Now, you have to define kung saan siya embedded. So, embedded post. And then sa post, syempre, i-define mo embeds many comments. It's the same as has many, and this is same as belongs to. Same conjugation din ng noun. So you don't embedded in one document, so it's singular, and same dito, embeds many, and then we have plural ng comments. So nangyari lang is embeds. Meron ring has many na function, pero again, hindi siya recommended. So then we have the routes. Okay, so okay siya. Commenter, let's say Terence. Like this presentation. Okay, wala.
Ako kasi
Sorry.
Comments.
Sorry, wala pa tayong create ng ano.
Post time.
So, again, questions and clarifications, tanong kaagad, unless gusto nyo proceed. And then maybe, please, alright, so meron tayo ng comments, meron tayong yung primary post, and then so it's working. And so, anong itsura ng data? So, meron akong gagamitin na tool, it's called Mongo Hub. It's like SQL para sa SE. It's like SQL or like yung PostgreSQL admin or something like that. PHP admin. PHP admin. It's something. It's a GUI for exploring MongoDB databases. So I use MongoHub. Ito yung mga database na ginagamit namin. Lahat yan ay production servers. And so, ano yung itsura niya? So you have post. You can see na meron kang ID, which is a, it's a auto-incrementing one, pero hindi siya katulad ng MySQL, for example, na 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hindi siya monotonic. Well, can be monotonic depending sa pag-create mo. Pero it's composed of the date, the machine ID, I don't know which machine ID they're using, MAC address or something, and then an increasing amount. So it's always, depending on the MongoDB server, it's always unique. It's a globally unique. So for example, in a sharded environment, iba-iba yung ID niya kasi iba-iba yung MongoDB server instances.
UAD.
It's universally unique. Ganun niya ginawa. Date, machine, and an increasing, monthly increasing amount. So
Given an ID, pwede mong reversible ba siya? Makakuha ba yung kung saan machine ang galing yung...
depende kung anong klaseng ID yung usually hindi natin sinesegregate. If you want to know kung anong machine ang galing, isi-save mo yung server name sa document. So, pwede natin gawin. So, ito yung itsura niya. So it's a JSON file or like JSON structure. Again, ang data na sinesave ni Mongo's at the backend is JSON, binary JSON. Of course, when you want it human readable, i-convert niya into JSON. So you have yung ID, and then you have comments, which is an embedded document. Makikita mo, pag kinuha mo yung post, lahat ng comments kasama rin. Hindi ka magkakaroon ng second trip sa database para sa isang foreign key. Now, this is a very, very small example, pero imagine lahat, for example, a log, and then you want to aggregate lahat ng logs for your cluster. Like for example, you have a messaging server. If you have a messaging server, you want to get all the transactions ng e-commerce platform mo, and then yung website mo. So pumunta lahat sila doon, and then gusto mo i-save. So you don't have to query all of their databases. Lahat na lang important information nandyan. And that's what the reputation of fast comes from. Kasi it's one trip, everything that you need. It's like ordering from a menu, kasi assembled na siya, kukunin mo na lang. But it really sucks for report generation. I'll talk about it later as well, yung prototype application na sinasabi ko last time. Kasi hindi ko pa alam kung ano talaga ang Mongo. It's still a relational database for me. Iba lang yung storage format. We were trying to do reports, bakit ang bagal-bagal niya? And then we just found out, aside from we're trying to do reports on it, where we try to pick certain fields, and then we're iterating through the whole database. There's also other things, and I'll talk about that later. So let's see. Ito yung, sorry, yeah?
May concept ba siya ng versioning? Yung isang document, kunwari, sinave mo siya. May embedded na siya na
yeah. So the question is, meron bang versioning ang MongoDB? By the server itself, wala. Pero on the client side, meron. And the Mongo ID ORM has ways to do it. Para meron na siyang includes. And what is, let me just go. Meron po akong internet dahil nakakonect yung cellphone ko. Baka po may nagigit.
Pwedeng pa-connected.
Naka-USB na tayo.
Pwedeng
So ito yung mga available extras ng Mongo ID. So, paranoid document. So, ang mangyayari dito, when you call delete, hindi siya actually deleted, magkakaroon lang ng extra field called deleted at, and then when you query, lahat lang ng hindi deleted at or something like that. So, and this is what you're talking about versioning. And then, so it saves previous versions of the document as an embedded document. So when you query a document, pati lahat ng versions siya na doon. So you can step back in time on those things. Of course, you can specify max versions. So if you only need the last two versions, then yun lang yung i-save niya, and then i-delete niya yung others. So there are many things. So timestamping, you created that and updated that, pwede mo rin ilagay dito. If you need those things, you don't have to make your own and then yung client code gagawa. So this is all client side, by the way. O yung ORM just makes it easy for you. Pero everything that happens in the server side, talagang nag-accept lang siya ng data. Yeah, any questions so far? Who has used Mongo ID before? What do you use dun sa production database mo? Mongo ID din. Or have you used yung mga extras dito?
Never pa namin nagamit yung mga embed. So, puro flat lang yun.
So puro foreign key resolution on
By SQL kami. Kasi usually yung mga events, yung parang feed, yung gamit namin for Mongo. So, simple lang naman siya na flat file with some statistics. So, simple lang.
Simple pa lang siya. May plans ba kayo para i-expand siya for other uses? Wala na.
So far, wala. But yun lang naman yun. Kung yung mga statistics namin, yun lang pinalagay.
Nag-MapReduce kayo sa statistics?
Yes. Pero dito kasi kami parang leaderboard type.
Okay.
Parang tinapalay lahat ng parang sum. So malaking sum. So yun yung perfect sa
Sa MapReduce. Ayos. Yeah, meron na akong kasama. So ito yung mga extras if in case Mongo ID yung ORM helps you for some conveniences. Alright. Ito yung representation niya. Again, embedded yung comments. Pagkuha mo ng post, na siya. So, punta tayo sa IRB. You can query it by its object ID. You can do it like that. So, ito yung post. And then, since it's an object, you can have like, let's see, p.comments, and then you have your comments. Okay? You also have the query interface of where name. So anong magiging output nito?
Parang Irish. Parang Irish query.
Irish, okay, pero medyo vague. Parang right? Yeah, actually, ang magiging output nito is criteria. Same as Rails 4. So naunahan pa sila ng Mongo ID. Same as Rails 4. Ang output usually ng mga where, mga ganyan, mga queries about the model is a criteria because it is lazily evaluated. Until you do something dun sa binigay niya, it's stuck as a criteria. Kasi eventually siguro magkakaroon ka ng null situation dyan, so you don't have to hit the database. So isa siyang isa to sa mga naging problems ko rin before when doing Mongo ID is that bakit criteria, yung criteria yung ganyan, and kailangan ko pa siyang, so the way to get it is to do something to the collection, or either like iterate through the collection and then display each of them, or just do entries. It's a convenience function para ilabas yung collection. So we have only one that matches it, so ito yung, so tama, array-ish, it's actually an array, well array-ish, but ito yung minamatch niya, so parehas good. Right? So can you do something like this? Comment.all.
Pero kasi gagamitin yan, bawal.
Actually, kang magiging, wala kang magiging result. Kasi it's an embedded document. When you're querying embedded documents, you can't get it immediately. You have to go through the parent. So, nangyayari yan, post.comments, where first. Yan. So ngayon, pwede ka na magkuha ng comments. Pwede mo na i-query yung comments embedded embedded document. So you went through the post. Hindi siya hindi siya class method. It's yung embedded document only works for a specific document. You have to go through the parent document para marating yung embedded document. Right? So this is a crash course on using Mongo ID and yung caveats niya. Any questions so far? Before I go to caveats, other caveats that we've learned sa production on MongoDB. Very similar to Active Record. If you want a sample of MapReduce, for example, meron tayong ganito. This is a entry. So for example, you have a map. You have your function. So MapReduce niya is also in JavaScript, written in JavaScript. So you have a map, and then you have your reduce function, and then you can do a MapReduce and those things. So if you call latest is, and then you perform MapReduce. And this is actually a special application as well, kasi this is actually a Sinatra application mounted on a Rails application. In case you're interested kung you like it. So this is a Sinatra application, and then you have using asynchronous event machine, and then mounted on a Rails application, and then it's all the code. But so usually that's what we do in production. For APIs or just data collection, it's in Sinatra. Kasi mas madali yung development niya, and also you don't have to go through all the Rails middleware para lang gawin yung isang function para mag-return na isang value. But for admin views or for those that you need MVC, just because Rails has better libraries for those things, usually Rails yung ginagamit. Kaya kinocombine namin yung Rails and Sinatra. Alright, so let's go back to, sorry? Okay po.
Index, merong column.
Yeah. Yeah, so index, this is yung column 1, is actually the direction of the index. This is ascending. If you put -1, it's descending. So yung index nyo is also optimized for what kind of direction you're querying. So for example, it's a log, then usually yung direction mo is descending kasi you're most likely interested in the most recent ones versus the earlier ones. So it depends. So for this one, it's very simple. It's first in, first out. So index mo is ascending. And also, one thing though, na nakakalimutan lagi namin also as in production, and then suddenly makita mo bakit ang bagal-bagal database, it's because you actually have to run a rank task to create the index. You don't have, it's not automatically created. Kasi you might expect, since the documents are automatically created, the collection is automatically created, index is also automatically created. Hindi. So you have to run rate Mongo ID create _ indexes para gawin niyo yung index. So mangyayari, magkakaroon ng parang ganito. So for example, ito, indexes, magkakaroon na, so the ID, your object ID is always indexed. So this one is not indexed. Maybe I'm not just running it in local. Pero in production, you create the index, so lalabas dito lahat ng mga indexes. So if you're finding out na yung database nyo is slow sa performance, either mag-explain kayo ng query, ma-explain din sa MongoDB, or tingnan nyo kung in the first place, tingnan nyo kung index talaga siya. Okay? Questions so far? Sinong gagamit na ng Mongo ID after this? Para lang paglaruan ng konti. Alright. Wala pa. Hindi convincing. Anyway, so caveats about using. So I have also a different presentation on this. This one was presented nung last December sa Mongo, sa KL user group. 1 year with MongoDB. For the company. So I'll also explain to you here, although this is a bit more intermediate kasi this presumes that gumagamit na kayo ng MongoDB. So alam niyo na kung ano yung mga pains and pain points ng using a a NoSQL database or a document store versus a SQL database. So ito yung good, the bad, the ugly, and I'll probably just gloss over yung good kasi most of the good stuff na-explain ko na rin. So, one of the good things is schemaless, like what you say. So, I'll just show you the schemaless thing, yung sinasabi ko. So, because you're not really constrained to just using kung ano yung fields na dinefine nyo dito. So, for example, pwede kayo maglagay na first.create or something like that. And then it will create it as well. So pag tinignan nyo sa browser, meron kang post na ang field is foo and the value is bar. And does this make sense? Probably not. Does this happen in production? Maybe 5%, 10% of the time, depending kung ano yung use case mo. For example, on our analytics platform, it's more on, so we get everything that the browser sends us and save it to the database. Some browsers send cookies, some browsers send the referrer, some browsers don't send the referrer, some browsers send whatever things. May JavaScript function din kami para for the browser size and those things. Sometimes JavaScript can detect it. So it's very, very flexible. And we just need a log of everything that's there. If the browser doesn't send these values, then we don't save it. So then this is where you deal with schema migrations na not all documents have the same fields. And like for example, this one is in the post collection, pero meron kang foobar na hindi naman defined sa model mo. Of course, you can't access it directly, but you can always change your model para suddenly you have a full function that, for example, only returns documents that have the full field defined. Okay? So that's good for us, especially on the use cases that we have kasi schema-less siya. And it's also very good for prototyping, very, very fast. Kasi kung mag-change ka ng mile, ayoko ng pangalan na to, and you're only on development anyway, you don't have to migrate and then restart your application, especially on a large application where restarting the application is very, takes a very long time. What's bad about it, especially no 1.6 pi MongoDB, is yung 2 gigabyte limit on a 32-bit machine. So what we use is Linode most of the time for our deployments. And by default, sa Linode, pag gumawa ka ng machine, they will give you a 32-bit image. And so, okay, since testing lang naman siya, yung prototype, okay, lagay namin doon. It's a quick one. We just create a machine and that's it. And install MongoDB and that's it. And then suddenly, yung kinikwento ko nga kanina, biglang naging production yung server, yung application. Then napansin namin, bakit at this particular date, wala nang nangyari, tas ang dami application errors. And then we found out na since it's one huge file in database, or for a collection, one huge file, on a 32-bit machine, hindi kaya i-address yung 2 gigabytes, hindi siya pwedeng ilagay sa memory, hindi siya pwedeng ilagay sa file system. The addressing is not capable, kaya hindi pumapasok yung mga documents. So if you're going to run MongoDB on production, you have to be aware of this. Most of the time naman, pag nagsiset up ka ng server, 64-bit na yung gagawin nyo. And for my company, it's always like that. Pero just in case, nagawa kayo ng server, or for example, sa Bluehost kayo, then suddenly nagpapay kayo sa inyong server. Tingnan nyo muna kung last time, pwede kayong mag-compile ng certain programs sa papaan na yun. Kasi i-redirect mo na lang yung port sa mga Bluehost. Pero ayaw ka na ng Bluehost. What's ugly? Migrations. Start doon na sinasabi ni Nestor. You don't have migrations per se for the database, but you have schema migrations. So, for example, yung example natin kanina, yung post na may full bar, ano gagawin natin doon? Depends on the client, kung ano yung use case mo. The database doesn't care what you store. It won't do any constraints for you. Everything happens on the client. So you have to do it yourself. And again, the recommended way for doing migrations is on a per-use basis. Kung may suddenly merong request for this particular document and this document does not match the schema that the application is expecting, then you modify the schema yourself on the fly. What's good is the query language. So for example, punta tayo sa Mongo Hub. Query language looks something like this. So I remember I'm working on the post database, so it's strict JSON. Okay. Bakit? Ganun. Yeah. So ito yung result ng query. It's name, is password, and then you have it like that. If you want to query yung embedded documents, then you'll have something like comments. Commenter. And then, syempre, babalik pa rin yung parent document. But you can see, wala yung foo bar dito kasi hindi siya nagmamatch na lahat ng commenter is parents. Baka itanong nyo bakit pumasok rin yung commenter dito. It's because you're actually you're querying the parent object, the parent document. So ibabalik niya sa'yo in one batch. Hindi niya ipipick yung kung ano yung query mo lang. You can do that in client side. But since ibabalik niya naman sa'yo yung lahat, so kunin mo na lahat and then saka ka nitpick dun sa client code mo. Right? So it's actually quite easy if you've been working with JSON, JavaScript. Madaling ilipat yung knowledge from front-end to querying the MongoDB database. Alright? Questions so far? No? Okay. So what's ugly is management tools and interfaces. So actually, itong Mongo Hub, MongoDB, pwede ka naman mag-quote ng single quote lang naman eh. Or pwede kahit wala. It's a JSON query. Or for example, yung name walang quote and then the value is just is quoted. Everything JSON. It's just that itong particular client na to is the only one that works well on a Mac. Pero marami siyang mga etche na padrama effect na ganyan. So kailangan double quotations and those things. So there's not a lot of graphical user interfaces for Linux and Mac and Windows. Not a lot. You usually have to go through the command line para i-explore yung database models, which is not really a problem kasi usually you use the database in the context of your application, so you have all of your abstractions. Pero kung gusto mo lang talagang makita, magpa-pattern matching ka lang based on looking at it, tama ba yung itsura ng data ko, or nandiyan ba yung mga fields na in-expect ko, just a quick smoke test. Not a lot of interface tools available yet. It's a very, very new technology. It's not like SQL na more than 50 years, so marami nang sinulat, marami nang mga admin interfaces. This one, hindi pa masyado. What's good is the Ruby ORM support. It's good because Ruby is a dynamic language, so marami kang mga meta programming methods, magic methods na pwedeng gawin dyan, mga find by, which Mongo ID doesn't support, by the way, and Rails 4 will not be supporting as well soon. So, madaling i-transfer yung document store into the realm of Ruby, or at least any kind of of a dynamic language. Not like Java, for example, or C++, marami kang kailangang i-define. And for example, for schemas na iba-iba yung schema per document, hindi ka basta-basta pwedeng mag-call ng comments na wala namang comments yung particular document na yun, or something like that. So mas maganda yung Ruby ORM support niya. But the bad thing here is the replication support at the driver level. So ang mangyayari nito is not all drivers are created equally, and also, for example, what happened in production before is we have a cluster of 3 replicas, well actually 2 replicas and 1 arbiter, and then ang nangyari, nag-fail yung master replica, yung master node nag-fail. So what happens is the client actually needs to watch out na nag-fail yung master and then reroute to the other replica, to the one that's voted to be the master, to the next master. Not all drivers do that, at least on that particular version that we're using. Meron na lang suddenly na error message saying, oh, hindi nag-read dito sa host na to. This host cannot be found, or something like that. I cannot connect to this host, and we don't know what happened. And then, master found out, walang failover. We had to actually use a better ORM driver for transferring, for failing over. So not all drivers are equal. The Mongo ID ORM is using a different driver, by the way. It's called Moped. It's not using the MongoDB Tengen provided driver. So it's using Mongo ID 2.x. Everything about on the 2 series is using the MongoDB Tengen driver. Mongo ID 3, which is the most recent version, is using its own driver. Okay. Any questions? Do you still understand what I'm talking about? For those in production already, malamang naintindihan nila. Again, what's ugly is the transaction support or the non-transaction support. Transactions are, again, like I mentioned nung umpisa, you can have transactions, pero you have to implement it on the client side. It's like multi-threaded programming in C++. You have to do your spin locks or your mutexes and those things, making sure na yung data entry mo, yung data stream mo is serialized so that if you have to roll back, you know what happened. But you have to do it all on the client side. The driver does not hold your hand. It does not give you a begin transaction, the end transaction, and what happens in between, you roll back automatically. Wala pong ganun sa MongoDB. It's both benefit because the driver, all the database has to take care of is just writing things to its store, but of course it's inconvenience kasi you have to do it yourself. Right? I think Mongo ID will,
To add, although it doesn't support the global transaction, it does guarantee that each operation is atomic.
Correct.
So you can, as much as possible, you can use increment or add as many fields as you can in one shot. It's guaranteed to be atomic at that level.
Yes. So in MongoDB, we mentioned yung ACID compliance before. It's not atomic on a collection level. So that means you can update twice and then hindi mo alam po ano yung nauna. Atomicity ba yun or isolation? Kalimutan ko na. Basta, but it is atomic in the document level. So you have certain functions where you update attributes, you update all attributes in one shot, and you're guaranteed na hindi siya half updated. You're guaranteed that it will return you what you've updated. Now, another call might be modifying that document, and that no guarantees on that one. You have to handle it yourself. So it's atomic on the document level, but not the collection level. Thanks.
Paano isolation? Do you read automated records or can you read on those documents?
That's more consistency. So ang mangyayari, usually ang problem yan is if you have replica sets for scalability, if you only write to master, read from slave, for example, from one replica, what happens is we have something called eventual consistency. You write to master, but you're not guaranteed that the replica will receive it in the next millisecond, within the next second, not even within the next day. It depends. Kasi for example, offline yung connection, or talagang mabagal yung connection yung maaari pwedeng updated yung replica the next day. So there's no guarantees for that. And you have to handle it on your own client. Yeah.
Just to add, this is something you've noticed. Actually, when you start having lots of transactions, there is a write lock per node. So when something is writing, it blocks other writers.
It still uses locks.
Yeah.
Which version?
I don't know, 2?
2.0?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it improved.
Yeah, it's improved on 2.2
Yeah.
and even more improved on 2.4.
Okay.
So, yeah. So 2.0 is, you have a global write lock on the database, I think. I'll have to check it, but there's a global write lock, and then 2.2 I think is just a collection, and then 2.4 is, it's improved. And then there's also like, if a contention ratio or something, that if you're heavy on writes, it will sometimes release the lock so that you can do something
Yeah,
else.
I think they improve in MapReduce. It
Yeah.
sometimes releases the
Correct.
lock. Because before, in pre-2, when you do MapReduce, it's so bad, like the performance is so bad.
Yes.
But it's
Kasi the whole process is locking on the MapReduce, on the map. So you can't write, you can't read anything. It's improved on every iteration. I think 2.6 yung latest ngayon. It's been improved. Right? Questions so far? Parang production talaga yung naranasan niyo na yung mga pain points na ganito. Good. Yeah. So it's always different on every database. Storage has its own pros and cons. It's just that yung SQL-based SQL-based or relational databases, mas marami yung field of experience ng mga tao. And so maraming mga ways para to work on it. On non-relational databases, because it's very new, yung pool of experience is not yet that large. So what's very ugly is, and usually what most newbies on non-relational databases commit, the mistake is that using a document store as a relational database, yung nga sinasabi ko yung buffet versus menu analogy. And we had this, the prototype application that we're using is actually doing reports on the non-relational stuff. And it's very, very slow. So what we did is, we have a cron job that still does that, click pa rin, pero sinisave that siya sa isang MySQL. So it's a walk, database walk of everything. And then, of course, on a certain cutoff, and then lahat lang naman dyan, papasok sa MySQL database, and then doon kami gumagawa ng reports. It's a lot easier, a lot faster, it's just one SQL statement. A lot better on resources kasi hindi 100% yung CPU mo as the database walking through all of your records. So, again, every tool for a purpose. So it's on a per case basis. If you're doing reports, most likely non-relational is not for you. If you're just picking things na buo na, if you're just wanting to pick per menu, like for example, a product and everything about the product, yung ISBN niya or author niya or maybe a ticket, something like that, it works well for that. But if you're, sorry?
Have you tried using it with Redis?
Redis.
MongoDB and Redis?
I haven't really found any use case para sa dalawa. Kasi if we are going to be using Redis, primarily due to its speed, it's more of like a cache.
Yeah.
But if we need extra things, then we can use it as we usually transfer directly to Mongo kasi pwede mo rin gamitin na key value store siya, especially with capped collections. So there's such a thing called capped collections. You can cap it like 100, and then it's like a circular buffer. So first in, first out, and then pag nag-overflow na yung buffer, you cut off yung lahat ng earlier ones, and it's guaranteed to be in increasing order. So usually we use it for caching, for a capped collection for caching. We haven't found any use case na magkasama yung Redis and MongoDB kasi Redis, yung simple stuff, and then if you need something more complicated, mention MongoDB, and it's overlapping everything. That's what Redis is using. And plus, it's a lot easier to maintain. Kasi I also do system administration on the servers. So as a system administrator, thinking have something like that, I'd rather have less servers to administrate than more. So since it's my decision, okay, no, we're going to be using MongoDB only for those applications. Okay, any questions so far? No? All right. What's ugly? Long field names. So in SQL or in Active Record, we're used to specifying the whole thing. Like for example, I don't know. Name, first name, for example, first name, and then URL, website URL, something like that. Kasi sa relational, columns lang naman yung pinapangalanan mo. So there's not a lot of, parang fixed cost siya, na mahaba yung pangalan mo, na very readable yung code mo. So, and you're not incurring lots of cost dahil pinangalanan mo siya na mahaba. But since MongoDB is a document store, so makikita mo, this is one document. You can see commenter already like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 letters already. So imagine if you have like a million posts, a million comments, then you have a million times 9 letters dun sa document. So your database size will really grow large. And most of the online hosting for Mongo, Mongo HQ, Mongo Lab, they charge you by the database size. So again, we're going back to our prototype application kasi yun yung talagang masakit sa amin. Still legacy, still in production, pero kailangan namin i-maintain kasi ginagamit nila, masaya sila doon. So, long field names. And nalagulat ko, bakit ang mahal ng bayad namin? 4 gigabytes, ito a few 100,000 na naman, 500,000, 600,000 documents lang naman yung store namin. And usually, at that point, in SQL, napakaliit ng database size. And then we found out, oh yeah, each document is actually repeating the field name. So what is actually best practice here is you shorten the name, and then in your ORM, you translate the field names. So let me show you something. I don't know if it's like, let's see. Like for example, ito yung mga field names. Maliliit. But then later, I don't have the mappings here kasi hindi ko mention directly. For example, RG, and then you can have something like def. So RG is range, and then you just set up RG for example. So nakaganyan siya. So if you're querying range, you're returning yung short form, yeah. So that your controller code, for example, or when you're doing computations on your code, it's very readable. Pero when you're storing it in the database, maliit lang. So that's one of the things na talagang kinagat kami at talagang medyo nahirapan kami, and we figured out you're not supposed to use long file names, at least on the document store. Right? Kasi ma-replicate siya for as many documents as you have. Depending on the machine, yung size ng database.
Sa case niyo.
Sa case namin? Hey, meron ba akong connection? Ito ito yung luma namin.
Ganun. Question.
Yeah,
Pwede bang madali sa migration yung pag-truncate ng mga
pwede. Yun, mga schema migrations kanyan. Teka so this one is 1, 2, 3. This is already 3 gigs. And we only have like
1.5 million.
1.6 million documents on this one. So 3 gigs, 1.6 million, and it's and sorry, pakita ko lang ulit. So this is so medyo luma na to yung lumang document na to kasi naging so yun nga nangyayari yung replication hindi ka lang nag-replicate, so ginamit namin MongoLab para i-salba yung application. Kasi kung wala kang document, wala kang database para susulatan, problema yon. Usually we have our own clusters in there. Sort natin siya. So this is the sorting. Pwede mo siyang i-sort ascending order based on ID. So for example, this was November 13. So makikita nyo, ang daming lahat yan paulit-ulit, and ang hahaba ng mga names, and then your refers, and then everything else. And so, and then we were doing reports on this, so talagang sobrang bagsak yung pagkakaintindi namin ng non-relational databases before. So, yan. So, you're not supposed to use wrong field names kasi imagine ito lahat inuulit-ulit. If this was a relational database, lahat yan column names, and then madali lang kasi pasok ka lang pasok ng data. It's just the data itself. But in MongoDB, the database size also includes your field names. And if you have long field names, mas mahaba pa sa value mo, problema yun. Questions? Okay? Clear? Okay? Gotcha? What's that? Background indexing. So, ito nangyari again, it's a prototype database namin. Hindi lang alam, kailangan pa lang i-index yung database. And when you do an index na marami ng documents, matagal. It's mag-block siya. Although in the most recent versions, magkakaroon ng contention ratio pag merong write na papasok, minsan i-block niyo yung indexing and then mag-accept siya ng mga operations. Pero before that, blocking the whole thing. So that's why you have to index it already from the very beginning. Which is also why, when you're going to be using non-relational databases, you have to have a good feel kung ano yung data na gusto mong ilagay. Hindi siya na, isang migration na, okay na. Usually, dapat alam mo kung ano yung papasok. At least a feel of ano yung papasok, ano yung kailangan mong index, ano yung query patterns mo. It's the same as relational, but it's more important in at least in MongoDB. Kasi magkakaroon ka ng ganitong situations na kailangan mo index yung buong database, and you're not just indexing a column. Remember sa relational, you're just indexing a column and then lahat na gano'n. You're indexing every document. And you have to compute yung index, yung hash ng every document. The database has to compute every hash of that document. So it's a database walk. It takes very, very long time. Pwede niyang gawing increments. It's a sparse index. Pero it's more on the later parts. Yung mga later releases. But during the time na ginagawa namin yung app ko, this was what hit us the most. And especially yung, for example, yung magamit ng production 2.0, I think this is still a problem at that time. Okay. Replication is really easy. I won't go into replications here, pero madali lang talaga siya. Parang hindi siya katulad ng MySQL master slave na marami kang nagawin. It's mostly like you're bringing up a new node, saying what are the other nodes in this cluster. That's it. They will talk to each other. They will vote. So ang mangyayari, magkakaroon ng voting within the servers kung sino yung master, and then that's the master. And then pag namatay si master, magpo-vote na naman yung titira, sino yung master. Which is also why the recommended cluster size is at least 3 or an odd number. Kasi, pag nagkaroon ka ng even number, magkakaroon ng away. Ang tawag doon? May term sila na hindi makapag-decide. Deadlock. Nagkakaroon ng deadlock, hindi sila makapag-decide sino yung master kasi hati. So usually you have an odd number, or you add what's called an arbiter. So it's not really a database server, but it's an arbiter. Its only purpose is to vote sino yung magiging master. So it's actually very easy. Just set up a new server and then put the cluster information. That's it. Yeah. So ito yung obvious sa kanya. Replica sets need to be in threes. If all you're wanting is like a backup ng MongoDB database mo, usually just a second one is enough. But you have to actually have a third one to prevent deadlock. And since we're using Linode sa company namin, sayang naman yung $20 na isa pa walang ginagawa na niya, arbiter. So, parang waste of resources siya. Some people, they prefer na, for example, yung arbiter nandun sa isa pang, nandun sa master, for example, or sa isa pang MongoDB server. Kaso yung redundancy mo naman, apektado eh. Usually, mag-fail naman yung MongoDB database dahil nagkaroon ng hardware failure or node failure dun sa server na yon. So, dama yung arbiter. So, parang baliwala lang. You usually have to do it in a separate instance, usually in a separate data center, para in case magkaroon ng problem, nakaka-vote pa rin siya, okay, ito yung magiging master. So, it needs to be in trees and it can be a bit costly, pero you have to make it work. Yeah. What's good is very fast to set up, like what you've seen so far. No migrations, no database migrations. In Linux, you just have to do apt-get install MongoDB and it runs localhost 37017, and it's very, very fast. So it's not like, for example, the hardest database I've set up was PostgreSQL in Ubuntu kasi kailangan may separate user pa yung maintenance user, then root user is different and those things. So it's complicated, but what is bad about that is that there's no authentication by default. So what happened in the previous few months is that we just realized lahat pala ng mga database namin, like for example yung Momola, yung isang database namin, lahat ng database namin walang password protection, and it's not bound by not bound to connections for localhost. So hindi na nag-listen, madali naman mag-develop kasi connect ka lang kahit saan. So, kahit kailan pwede mo tingnan yung data mo. Yung nga lang, pati isipang tao, kahit kailan pwede tingnan yung data mo. So, nagkaroon kami ng security audit ng SOIA. Kailangan mo i-bind sa localhost, kailangan mong lagyan ng password protection. And that's an extra step, of course, to set up. Pero if you're still setting it up, like for example, production setup, you just want to make sure na yung host na to connectable, umaandar, smoke test ng application mo, okay, mabilis, set up ng cluster and those things. And then, umaandar ng application, ready for production, saka mo lagyan ng mga authentication and those things. So, kailangan ilagay mo siya doon sa launch checklist mo na you have to put authentication in your databases. So, yeah. So, sa KL Mag, may libre kami pizza. Ito lang lang dito.
Hello, pizza.
May pizza ba? Ayan, may pizza rin pala. So, in my experience sa MongoDB, my company's experience sa MongoDB, it's been really, really good. We're still sticking with MongoDB. Nakita mo yun naman yung, ito yung mobile development machine ko. Yung development machine ko dun sa Malaysia, yung isang tower, mas marami pang database ang naka-set up. But we really are using it primarily sa lahat ng mga bagong projects namin. We're only using Postgres, for example, on our e-commerce platform and on our accounts platform, user accounts platform, and those things. So only those that really require consistency consistency on the data and transactional supports. Those are the only two things na lilipat kami from MongoDB to Postgres. But everything else, we're using MongoDB. And I don't know about you, but we're happy with it, and I hope you're also happy with that one. So with this one, it's Meron akong,
Questions?
yeah, do you have any other questions? Kasi lalagay ko na yung final slide ng isang presentation. Yeah, so those are the caveats. So my handle is Parasquid sa Stack Overflows, Facebook, Twitter, GitHub, and IRC. May IRC ang page, Rob. Medyo magulo yung mga tao doon, so enjoy. Kaya punta kayo doon. Oh, hindi ba, kasi Malaysia is a very conservative country, so hindi ko na-expect yung gawin mga interaction. So masaya yung mga tao doon. So punta kayo, 3 nodes at hash page rub. Meron din ng webgeek na discover ko lang kanina. Mas tahimik sila doon, wala nagsasalita. At merong mga nag-CP thing version sa akin, kung sino. So, punta rin kayo doon. So yeah, if you want to contact me, nandito yung mga, so it's the same handle, Parasquid, in all of those. Yeah.
So what's the administration like sa production? Let's say if a replica goes down or the master goes down. Parang when you bring up a new replica to replace the master, how would the performance of the existing clients be affected?
So the question is, if you have a cluster replica set up and one of the nodes go down, will the client get affected?
Yeah, because if you bring up a replica, it has to get all the data from the existing.
Yeah. All right. So, so 2 things. One is that your driver needs to support failover, replica failover. So what happens? This node not connectable. So lipat ka dun sa susunod na master. Actually, ang mangyayari, this node fails. Na-detect ng dalawa. Oy, namatay na si katropa. So elect tayo ng master. And then, because the driver is querying, is not connecting to it, and also has the cluster information, ask siya dun sa, kahit sino dun sa dalawa natitira, oy, sino na ba ang master? Since nag-decide na silang dalawa, o connect na siya dun sa master. And then what happens, this is the master. Ang mangyayari, so you're bringing up a new node. Ang mangyayari, since it's eventual consistency, it's not guaranteed na kompleto yung data ni bagong gawang node. So again, your client needs to, your application needs to take into account na it's not guaranteed na whatever you're reading is what has been written. Yes? So, ang mangyayari, habang nire-rebuild siya, it might take a day or 2, you don't know. So what happens usually, what we do is, so you connect to the master, usually also, so you read from a different replica, and what happens is you set up usually two nodes, or like, I don't know, like 1 node. Problema siya kung master-slave, sorry, kung dalawa lang yung replica mo, tapos yung isa arbiter. Kasi talagang kailangan mag-rebuild siya. But for example, if you have 5 in a cluster, 1 arbiter, 4 replicas, when one goes down, usually hindi mo kagad siya i-connect sa cluster. Kuklone mo na lang yung server, and then change the IPs, and then konti na lang i-catch up niya, and then saka mo siya i-connect sa cluster, at least up to date yung information niya. Pero if you have like 2 replicas, one goes down, and you're only reading, you set it up so that you're only reading from the replica, medyo may problema tayo dyan. Patay tayo dyan. Either you deploy your app saying that you can also read from master, but the problem is, baka naman mamatay si master dahil write and read siya. So, magkakaroon na yung problema. Or just set up extra replica. So, in the beginning, kailangan mo lang paghandaan yung usage patterns.
So walang performance hit kung yun nga, namatay, bigla nag-shift. Walang noticeable na performance hit.
Yeah, on performance, no. But on behavior, pwedeng meron. Any other questions? Yeah.
So, by default, is your database choice Mongo, and then only if you need that consistency, you choose SQL?
Yes, right now, yes. Kasi most of our Rails applications are mostly internal. So yung data is already available everywhere else. So like for example, yung pinakita kong application yung daily, it's more on a reporting tool that brings many things together and then many different data sources together and then they just show it to the managers. Kailan kasi gusto nila mga graph, mga percentage increase, ganyan. So it makes that. So even if the data is not up to date, you don't need real-time data. Even if the data is missing a few days, kasi kailan pwede naman namin i-bring back. Even if the application goes down for a few hours for maintenance, it's okay because it's for internal use. But for front-facing, customer-facing applications, there are use cases na pwede mo pa rin gamitin yung MongoDB, but you have to take into account all of those caveats.
Have you played with Post versus HStore?
We are trying to explore HStore as well. So but we have, I don't know, kasi hindi namin alam kung pwede kang mag-query ng HStore per field. Kasi for now, I don't know, maybe we just don't understand it correctly, pero parang siyang isang field na block. Parang siyang block. Na, pwede mo ba siyang himayin sa loob? Para mag-query?
Pwede index yung individual.
Pwede siyang index.
Oo, individual fields.
So we haven't really but actually that's actually a good idea kasi if for example we finally figure out HTML, what's the most useful for us in MongoDB is because it's schemaless. So we don't have to pull down the application and then do a migration and usage. We can always just do it the migration as it happens. So mabilis siya for development. And what we're planning is, for example, if ever we need to redo something, like an application, because we're not really against you start from scratch yung isang project. Kasi it's mostly, most of our projects are mostly exploratory. This is something that we haven't done before, and most things, and we have to learn through the whole process. And then taking into account those learnings, and then we start off probably with the express or something. Depending on the usage pattern. Kasi most of the managers sa company ko, hindi nila alam kung anong gusto nila. So, it depends on the level. Okay, ito gusto ko ito gusto ko ito. Okay, hindi importante yung color ngayon, gusto mo yung functionality, ganyan. And then, okay, gusto namin to, sometimes hindi namin gusto to, or sometimes nila. So, kailangan mabilis yung iteration. And we really like yung flexibility na binigay sa amin ng Mongo, especially because of the schemaless things. So usually sometimes kapag nag-work ako dun sa isang platform na may SQL, sometimes nakakalimutan ko mag-migrate kasi tagal na akong hindi nag-migrate or nakalimutan ko yung syntax para sa migration or those things. Kasi nga mas mabilis yung development flow, at least for me. Yeah.
So, sorry. Back to your example there, yung comments that are embedded in a page.
Mm-hmm.
If you were then in a document or in a post, right?
Yeah.
So if you were then, let's say, many posts and then you're asked to make a page that's called flag comments, let's say comments that are flagged as spam, wouldn't that be an expensive page to make? Kasi you'll have to go through every post and then find the comments that are flagged as spam.
Yeah. So the question is, what happens if you want to filter an embedded documents? Tama ba?
Oh, let's say admin page. Like
Yeah.
every day you go through it to make sure na spam ba talaga ito.
Yeah. So what happens is that filtering happens somewhere anyway. In a relation database, it happens on the database side, but on a non-relational, it happens on the client side, but it happens anyway. So the performance impact depends on where you're doing the filtering.
Either way, papayag ka.
Either way, it has a cost.
So would that be many calls? Let's say per post, that would be a call per post.
so per post, so what happens is when you get a post, you get everything as a document. Again, that's why MongoDB uses document. Everything attached to that document kasama. Boom, it's a recipe, it's a pork afritada, kasama lahat. Completos recados.
So kunin lahat ng posts and then you go through each, every post's comments and then...
Right, but again, remember, it's happening on your client, which usually has the memory to do that. And memory operations on memory is usually very fast. Right? Any questions so far? Performance-wise, we haven't really had any problems with that. It's only when you're going across posts and then cherry-picking things, that's where it's really bad. Kasi nakita nyo naman kanina yung Oathkeeper database. If you pick meron din kami tinatawag SR number. If you pick SR and then you just want to pick SR and then do a report based on that, it means you're taking the whole document, putting it to client, and you're just taking one field. So that usage is very bad. But if you want to filter on the embedded documents, it's usually very fast because everything is already there in memory. It's almost like manipulating a hash. Like you hash dot delete if and then satisfying this function. Of course, if you're concerned about performance, sabi nga ni Donald, naalala niyo ba? Kalimutan ko na. Pre-optimization? Premature optimization is the root of all evil? Or evil ba? Evil. Root of evil, or something like that. Kalimutan ko na. Pero, again, if you're in doubt, benchmark. Usually, it's not going to be a problem. And if it's a problem, most likely you're using the wrong language. Siguro kailangan mag-C++ na tayo or mag-C. If that kind of performance is really important. But at least in my experience, in my company's experience for the projects, not that tangible performance increase or performance hit. Thanks for the questions, by the way. Mga important questions siya kasi those types of things are rarely pop off, especially when like us when we were first starting, we didn't really think about that. So maganda na yung mga developers na hindi katulad namin na naive na yeah.
Do you usually have, or is it normal for you to have two databases that are accessed from one project? Let's say your e-commerce, like everything except the orders and the order transactions goes to Mongo, but those two they go to Postgres.
Yeah. So the question is, do we have any projects, or is it possible to have multi-database sources?
Not really possible. Not possible, because I know it's possible. Pero parang, is it like a burden on development, like having to switch na, okay, Postgres to, tapos Mongo to yung
This
mga
model
models na to.
uses Mongo, this model uses...
Yeah, it's not, so for example, there are ways as well, like for example, pwede kang gumawa so this project, Daily, is actually a multi-document. So this is a Mongo document, and then we have as well, let's see.
Hindi. Ano? Si Tristan ba? Pa-plug niya yung apps for ano? Sabi ko sa kanya, i-plug niya yung apps for mga ganyan. Hindi. Sa time na lang. Hindi naman niya sinabi na dalawang oras yung talk niya.
So this one we don't have, but this one is connecting to both MongoDB and Postgres. What we usually do is bundle the MongoDB uses as a cache for the reports for pre-aggregated reports from SQL. Para every time nag-refresh si manager kasi gusto niya makita kung may sales, hindi nag-hit ng database over and over. Kahit sinasabi namin na pwedeng paki-hinahinay na kasi mabilis yung application pero pag nagre-refresh ka, nag-database query. So i-cache namin yung pre-aggregated report as a document, and then yun yung i-display namin. as cache. So that's what we usually do. There are also techniques na kung saan pwede mong i-refer yung ang tawag doon, pwede kang mag-hash many into Postgres dito sa MongoCache. Of course, you have to write it yourself na, for example, let's say comments, so dev comments, and then you'll have an active query record. Comment up where comments. For example, post, something like that. Parang ganito. So for example, this is comment is actually a SQL table or somewhere else like a Redis or something like that. Pwede kang gumawa ng sarili mong function definition na i-query naman yung kabila. So you can go through it like bundlecache.comments, which is actually on a different database. So there are many ways of mixing matching, but primarily for our projects, what we usually use is, if we're going to be using SQL, we will store all important data on SQL and we'll use MongoDB as a cache. If we're only using MongoDB, then we store everything in MongoDB. And if we don't really need everything for MongoDB, we just use Redis key values, or it's a simple key values. Yeah?
Maybe to the other way around.
Yes.
What I'm thinking is parang MongoDB can be the reception phase, and then
Yes.
later on use SQL server for updating.
Parang staging area.
You can also do the same thing. Although it's usually done the other way around kasi mas mabilis ang querying capabilities ng
Pero
relational.
before you do a query, kailangan mo na mag-release ng data. So I think MongoDB could fit that. Yung parang temp database na
Yeah.
doon ka lang mag-release. Then once okay na siya,
Pasok mo
saan
rin
mo
sa
na.
SQL. So that's what we're using as well on the report generation. Since mali yung approach namin, pasok siya sa SQL, query yung SQL, and then pasok ulit siya sa Mongo para for displaying, for saved searches. So we have such a thing called saved searches. So search ka sa SQL, and then save yung search mo para if you have the same parameters, pasok yung MongoDB. Ipapasok mo yung data para lahat na, hindi ka na mag-query din sa SQL database. Good question. But we usually do it other way around, from Mongo to Active Record, to SQL. But you can also do it, kasi Active Record, you can define your own functions, and you just query the other database. Right, any other questions so far? Okay, 9 o'clock, 9:15. Ito na tayo, nasa pizza. Alright. Thank you. Yay.